Hello, everyone. I am William Jamal Wright,
And I'm Hattie.
and this is our podcast. What are we doing? So today, recently we just celebrated Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day!
Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. They're staying and helping the mothers raise their child. And this is a day specifically for fathers. A lot of times they get the bad end of the rep. So it's good that the fathers out there that are doing a good job get their day of recognition. Recognition, same thing.
I'm making up new words. I like it.
Yeah. So we're going to get this started and just give a little bit of a shout out to all the Father's Day and talk a little bit about Father's Day, what it means to us, and how important it is to have the fathers in our life. So we'll let Hattie go and talk about her father, Brent.
So I kind of introduced my fathers, Brent and my stepdad, Scott, on our previous podcast. I think the first one we did. But a shout out to them, man. As I get older, more and more I realize not that it's difficult, but that it's time consuming to get myself ready to go. So what I'm thinking about specifically is I love to sleep in. Even today I slept in. And when I was a kid, especially in middle school, high school, I really, really struggled to wake up when I was supposed to wake up. And I think part of that was because I also struggled to fall asleep and stay asleep, and I have problems sleeping. I'm not very good at it, but once my prime sleeping time is the morning, and the easiest way for me to fall asleep is if I just woke up. So it's
Huh? The easiest way for you to fall asleep is if you just woke up?
Yeah, if I just woke up to an alarm or something, I can fall back asleep instantly. But any other time, it's really hard for me to fall asleep. And there'd be lots of times.
What? This makes great no sense at all.
It makes good sense. Anyway.
In your head.
Anyway, there would be lots of times, where my parents, often my dad or my stepdad, would come down to wake me up, and it'd be the third, fourth, fifth time, and I'm gonna be late, all this stuff, and I'm still dead asleep in bed, I can sense their frustration, but in my head, it's the first time. I don't remember that they've come in 5 other times. I can just tell by their tone of voice that,
they're wanting you to get up.
Yes. And just to think about, man, it's enough, hustle and bustle for me in the morning to get up, get ready, eat breakfast, get my dog breakfast, take my dog out, make sure my dog's okay. That's just a dog, and it's just one. So to imagine, my dad, Brent, there'd be a lot of times, especially in high school, because Connie was not living with us. She was in Wisconsin, where it'd be just my dad and then the 3 of us. And he would make every morning breakfast of champions. We would have homemade oatmeal, we'd have toast, we'd have hard-boiled eggs, sometimes soft-boiled eggs, vitamins, and then a fruit. A banana. Yeah, breakfast of champions. But he would make all of that himself. So he would get up, get himself ready, get breakfast started and being made, get the 3 of us up, which I'm not saying that Rob and Jeff were bad at waking up like I was, but they were,
they're kids.
They're kids.
They don't want to get up in the morning.
Yeah, it takes extra time. So, can you imagine all that work? And, then if one of them is just no, just giving, causing problems. My dad has infinite patience. That's what I've learned. But yeah, every single day he would make sure that we were fed with a really delicious breakfast, really sustaining breakfast, nutritious. And so shout out to all the dads for making sure that happened. Because it wasn't like my dad had anyone to help him. It was just him. And likewise, Scott, my mom was around, but there's a lot of times where they split the responsibility. So it's not like Mom would come down and then Scott would come down. It'd be like, Scott's ready to get us out of bed and get going. So, yeah, that's just one tiny example of all the awesome dad things my dad and my stepdad have done. Yeah.
So I would say, for me, Father's Day is a very, it's kind of it's a difficult day, but it's also, it's a bittersweet day. Just to think about, first of all, you look on Facebook and a lot of my friend groups now, they're becoming fathers. They're doing great jobs, and that's definitely something that I look forward to becoming in the future. And it's definitely very, definitely reaches a little soft spot in my heart to see all of my friends and family being great dads and doing great things as fathers. But looking back at my childhood, definitely Father's Day harbors some negative feelings towards fathers. I remember, so basically for the first half of my childhood, I had a father. I would say basically he was my stepfather, but I didn't know that he was my father. He was my brother's, my brothers and sisters' biological father, but he was my stepfather, and I didn't know this at the time.
So you felt like you felt like he was your dad.
Yes, I felt like he was my dad. I treated him as my dad. He treated me as his son, and it was definitely like, I would say it felt like he was my father. And then throughout, like, growing up, I would hear little rumblings from like family members, and I don't know why they did it, but I would just hear like little rumblings like, such and such, their daddy is not your daddy. And it would be like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's my daddy. Like, that's my father. I don't know what you're talking about. So it was definitely something that, like, I would hear growing up, but I just never paid any attention.
Because it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, it just didn't make any sense. And then once...
And your parents had decided that they, like, that wasn't how they were going to conduct. You know what I mean? There'd be one thing if they decided, well, we're going to tell him this, that, and the other, but it appears that they did not make that choice.
Well, it was just a situation where he was my father, and I'm not sure what the background discussions were or anything like that. But all I knew is that he was my father. And then there came a time where my mom and my brother's dad, they split apart, and the issue of child support came up, and my brother's dad didn't want to pay child support for me, which was definitely very, it was kind of like he was throwing me away a little bit, saying that, like, he was disowning me. Not throwing me away, but just disowning me. And that definitely hit a chord growing up. And I definitely have a lot of resentment towards him for that. And I would say to this day, like, we don't have a relationship as a result of that. So that was definitely difficult to handle growing up. But I definitely... as I've matured over the years, I can definitely understand his rationale and thought process behind it. And it's interesting if there could have been some conversation about that, including me, and just talking it out. I think I would have handled it better, and being able to, like, reasonably understand the decision making, because I mean, paying child support for 4 kids is less money than paying child support for 5 kids. So, like, financially, especially living in the society that we live in, like, it makes sense that, like, you would only want to pay for 4 kids as opposed to 5. But, like, definitely Father's Day, it definitely brings up those memories. Um, but it's life. I think looking back on it, it definitely made me tougher. It makes me realize the relationships that people have with their fathers. Um, I didn't have a father per se, but I definitely had a lot of father figures growing up. Um, People that they weren't necessarily my biological father, but they definitely set an example for me, and an example of what a father could be. Um, and it's interesting to me. I once took a class at Duke where it was about anthropology and how to write an ethnography. For
Oh,
those of you,
what?
an ethnography.
Yeah, tell us about what's
So
an
for those of you
ethnography.
that don't know what an ethnography is, it's very similar to a documentary. And people write like book ethnographies. But basically, you situate yourself in an environment, um, and you try and tell that story of what's going on in that environment and what's going on in that space. So, for example,
So it's not like a biography is the history of a person, and
mhm,
ethnography is the history of like a place.
yeah, but it can also be like a culture or society,
Yeah, so I
or
guess it's like a thing that's not necessarily a person.
yes,
Okay.
but it can also be a person. But typically, if it is of a person, it is a biography or autobiography. And there's all types of um, issues that come up with doing an ethnography, as like, well, is such and such, do they have the right to tell this ethnography about this place?
Mm-hmm.
Or like they an insider? Is it better to be an insider or somebody that comes in with a point of view that is completely different? But basically, as an ethnographer, you want to be able to tell that story. Um,
So the woman who wrote the book Hidden Figures, would you say
yes,
that's an example of she's an ethnographer and that her book Hidden Figures is an ethnography? Because it's not specifically focusing on one individual or one person, but it's more like the group of women that were working there at the time at
no, I
Langley.
wouldn't say like
And like,
Hidden Figures is a form of ethnography. That is a story.
but
I would say that an
it's true.
ethnography, yeah, it's true, but it's a story about like people. So
Is that not an ethnography?
if you wanted to do an ethnography, I would think that you would go to. It can be a form of ethnography, but if you wanted to do an ethnography, like a person would go to NASA and embed themselves in NASA,
Mm-hmm.
in the whole environment of NASA, and
Mm-hmm.
then tell that story.
Okay, so because the time that this Hidden Figures is set is not the current time, the author can't go embed themselves in what NASA Langley was like.
Yes, yes.
So what she did instead was had tons of interviews with the people involved and their grandkids and their kids,
yes,
and kind of embedded herself in the place that they were living.
Well,
But
she
because of
grew
the
up in.
past,
She grew up
she
in
grew
that.
up there.
Yeah, so she was already embedded in there.
Yeah, so I might still argue that it is maybe,
And
but
you can
anyway,
argue that it is like it's
I'm learning
tomato
the term.
tomato.
I'm learning the
Tomato
term for
tomato.
the first time, and it helps me to learn to come up with like examples.
Yeah. So we in this class, Dr. Linda Burton, who is the dean of the sociology department here at Duke, wonderful lady, absolutely wonderful lady. I met her my senior year, and then in graduate school, I actually took some classes with her. Um, she was actually on The Price is Right once, so she's just a wonderful lady. But we went. I was taking her class, and it was on like the concepts of writing an ethnography. And we went to. She basically told us all to basically find a space and take ethnography notes for each of us. So each of us had to turn in notes on the space or the place that we wanted to do an ethnography on.
And so, what types of things do ethnographers, when taking these notes, what are they looking for? What are they? what types of things are they writing down?
I mean, you just write down what you see. You can write down how you feel. You can write down like what's taking place. That's really like there's no, you do interviews of the people that are there. That's really you write down any and everything that you can take like notes on.
Cool.
So I went to I did mine on Wilson Gym, and I was taking notes on everything, and I would go there on like Sunday afternoons, like Monday mornings, Friday afternoons. It was just like different random times to kind of get a vibe of what was going on there, and also the people and the way they interacted, and the way like masculinity, like just any different, like if there was a woman there, did that like create a disruption for like how it normally goes? So like just any and everything.
Why would having a woman there create disruption for how things normally go?
Well, just like how the way people talk, like people may be nicer to each other, like the way they compete against a woman may not be the same way they compete against a guy. Like if you're like if a girl is guarding you, like,
so you're specific to the basketball?
Yeah, like I was just looking in the gym, like Wilson Center. Like it
Okay,
was specifically
so when you
in
say
the
Wilson
gyms.
Center, I was thinking like treadmills, weight room.
No,
like
this
the
is
whole
only
shebang.
gym. It's
This
only
is just
in the gym.
literally the basketball court.
Yeah,
with the little track around and stuff.
yes.
Okay, all right.
So
I was gonna say I would expect there to be lots of women there, and
Well-
it'd be hard to see how things change when a woman shows up because there's tons of women there all the time.
yeah, in the Wilson Center, but in the
Yeah.
basketball
Okay, I
gym,
was just
there's not
confused.
very many girls that come in outside of with their boyfriends and stuff like that. But beside the point. So I turned in my notes, and so part of the class was we would meet individually with Dr. Burton, and she would tell us, like, ask us questions and probe us about, like, the notes that we took. And through, like, going through that, she would, like, ask me questions about, like, hey, are you, like, it seems like you're, like, a lot of your notes are centered around, like, father, like, son relationships, and, like, there's this.
So were there a lot of father sons in the Wilson?
Well,
like,
they're
I'm confused
like
at how you were making these observations when the gym is typically for students.
Well, Wilson Center, like in the Wilson gyms, like there are a lot
Yeah,
of
it's open
like
to everybody. I just
there are a lot of like people like that come in with their kids and stuff like that.
Okay, this is making more sense.
Yeah. So she's just like noticing that hey, like there are a lot of people who are not necessarily like. This seems to be focused. A lot of your notes seem to be focused around like father-son relationships, and not necessarily like what's going on like in the gym, or like she made the point that maybe you're seeing what you want to see as opposed to seeing what is actually there.
Or that you're focusing on it a bit, because I'm sure what you're writing down was there. There's a lot of other things that are there.
Yeah, but so that was just like a weird.
How did that make you feel? What did you think about that when she said that to you?
I mean, I was like, well, I guess looking at my notes, like she does have a point, in that like a lot of my notes were centered around like interactions between like what were older adult males and like younger males, and I could see her point in that it was because I didn't necessarily know if they were father-son. I just kind of attributed that relationship to that bond.
Sure, and whether or not they were father-son, there was definitely the dynamic of one is the, maybe not necessarily responsible is the right word, but one is the, like the caregiver or caretaker,
for that
and is the setting the example person for the younger.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like the younger one looks up to the older one, whether or not.
I didn't necessarily say I read that much into it. It was much more of a passing down of like the skills, basketball knowledge that you would see like an older man passed down to like a younger generation.
Gotcha. Okay.
But so that was something that was a little eye-opening for me. It's interesting looking at like Father's Day and fatherhood because a lot of times, of course, like you have a father, he has a son
or daughter,
or a daughter, and then that father who had a son, he then or daughter, and then he in turns has another son, and then the first father he becomes a grandfather. And for me, I never knew any of my grandfathers. My mom's father, he passed away when I was like 2 years old. So everything that I know about him comes from my mom.
The same with me.
And my grandmother, and the stories that they share with me. So I've also talked a little bit in previous episodes about my brother's, my siblings' father, their mother and grandfather, Grandma Cat. She kind of had me as her grandmother, and definitely felt like a grandmother to me. And it's funny listening to her talk about like her relationship with her husband, who they divorced, and like my sibling's father, a lot of words there. He is actually still alive, but he was never really in any of our like lives growing up. We knew that he existed, but he was definitely nowhere near as prevalent as my grandmother.
So did you ever meet him?
I did meet him a couple of times. I'd probably say I met him probably like 15 to 20 times in my whole life. But so it's just interesting that the thought of like fatherhood and that turning into grandfatherhood and kind of passing those lessons along, because it's definitely different from being a father as opposed to a grandfather. I can say for sure watching Scott and Brent like interact with Oli and Wells.
So Oli and Wells are my niece and nephew. My older brother Rob and my sister-in-law Sarah have two lovely, lovely kids. Also who have a lovely mom and a lovely dad. So happy Father's Day, Rob. You're doing great.
So it's just interesting to see them interact with their grandfathers and their grandkids. And then also just
so
looking at it.
In what way? Like what's interesting?
Well, it's just that like not necessarily if you don't have a grandfather, how that void is not there. How if you don't have a grandfather, that leaves a void. But if you do have, I'm not saying if you don't have a grandfather, you have a void. I'm saying that if you have a grandfather, that adds it's like icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm. Right. So not having one doesn't necessarily cause a problem.
Yeah,
but having one is the extra benefit.
Yes. And it's just interesting looking at like my nieces and nephews and like the ways in which in the access that they have to their grandfather, which is just interesting to think about like the ways that helps with like development and like helping with nurture a child as they go through, because I don't think anybody could deny that like the older you get, the more mature you get, and those lessons as a grandfather that you can pass along to your grandkids, it definitely it makes for a healthier living and growing up environment.
I agree with that.
Yep. So, anything else that you like to add?
I don't know. Do you have any questions for me or anything?
I do not really have any questions. What would you say is like one of your fondest memories of your dad's growing up?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have a lot of fond memories. I don't know. I think several memories come. It's hard to pick just one, and it's less necessarily of a specific time, but more of many things that we would do.
Mm.
So, for instance, with my dad, two things come to mind that are special to me. The first is every night he would tuck me into bed. He would come in and like talk with me about things. Sometimes he would have a little newspaper clipping or a book that he wanted to read a little excerpt of, and we would talk. And even other times he'd have the back of an envelope and a pen or a pencil, and we'd be drawing graphs and talking about things, you know. So it was very rarely just, oh, good night, tuck you in, give you a kiss, bye. It was always a conversation. It was usually like 20 to 30 minutes type thing. And this was from when I was small until when I was graduated high school. Like, it was a very constant thing. And at the time, sometimes I would be annoyed because I would just want to sleep or I'd want to keep reading. But it wasn't like I was annoyed every single time. It's probably only 15% that I was annoyed. And otherwise, I really just enjoyed talking with my dad. I think that, so I did a lot of gymnastics growing up, and especially as I was doing more heavy gymnastics, I would leave for school in the morning, go straight to gymnastics from school, and I would get there either by the bus or walk. So it wasn't like a parent was providing transportation when I was at my dad's house. And then I would come home, he would pick me up at like 8 or 9, or I would have a carpool. So I wouldn't get home until it's basically time for homework and bed, and everybody else had already eaten dinner. You know, my dinner would be in the microwave. I would turn it on. You know, so I would say I didn't have like a lot of the dinner time conversations, or we're home after school and we're hanging out. Like, a lot of that I was not present for. Mm-hmm. So it was really nice for me to have this to me it felt like extra time, whereas to him it probably still didn't feel like enough time. But kind of extra time with my dad, and it was one-on-one time, so that was nice, and I feel like he and I both like to think about things, so it was just, I enjoyed that time, and it was really special to me. And at the end of the night, every night before he would leave, he would always take my hands like this, and he'd do like this, and he'd say, these hands are going to do great things, and then he'd give me a kiss on the cheek, and he would leave, and I would go to bed, and it was just like really sweet of my dad.
Aww.
Yeah. Made me feel really confident, made me feel like he really loved me and believed in me, and it was just great.
Good job, Brent.
So things like that. Another thing that I loved with my dad was he would, and this was more when we were small, he coached badminton, and so we would go to the Denver Athletic Club in downtown Denver to play badminton. Really, it was him to coach and play, and then Rob and I would just kind of run around. I feel like Jeffrey either had to have been very small, but Rob and I were pretty small, so it wasn't like Jeffrey was really at running around age, whether or not he was there. But it was always like a big family event. Like, we didn't go to the DAC for an hour. It was like we're there for like 4 or 5 hours, you know, and we're always coming back, and it's so late at night, and my dad only listened to 2 things in the car on the radio with us in the car. Either Spanish talk radio,
what?
Huh? To increase, like, you learn languages best as a small child.
Yes.
And his theory is that, you know, when you're born, you don't know any language. And so you just learn the language by being exposed to it, and people interact with you and talk with you. So obviously we were not just born, and obviously we weren't having people like hand us things and say the name in Spanish, but it still helps your brain to differentiate where does an end of the word, like where does a word end and where does a new word begin when you just constantly listen to a different language. And it helps, even if it's a small help and even if it's subconscious, it helps you acquire another language if you so choose to do so. So that wasn't the main thing we listened to, but there, especially in high school when we were all in Spanish classes, like that's all we would listen to in the car. But of course, we would still have conversations like over that. It would just be background. But the other thing would be classical music, and so there'd be so many nights where I would have had
little Mozart.
Yes, all sorts of things. Such a great day running around at the badminton gym at the DAC. So tired, getting in the back seat, just falling asleep with classical music. It was so relaxing. It's dark. You're in the car. It's I really enjoy sleeping in kind of motion. So on like planes, trains, cars. Oh, so great, so great. So that was good. And likewise with Scott, one of the things I really loved, his parents lived on a lake for a long period of time in Nebraska. And so Scott...
Cornhuskers.
Yep. So Scott and his brother Mark, I think they moved there like the last year that Scott was in high school, or maybe when he was a junior in high school. But anyhow, so they have been very familiar with that house and the lake. Mm-hmm. And they've had a boat for a long time. And so they're really good at water skiing, slalom skiing, all that sort of stuff. So we would go in the summers, and it was always so great because anytime you wanted to go out on the boat, Scott would definitely go. And when Scott's the driver, it's not like he's getting the benefit of being on the lake and skiing because he's the driver, right? And very rarely was there another driver so that Scott could have a turn, right? Like, I feel like sometimes that would happen, either Grandpa Bill or Uncle Mark could drive, but if the rest of us all got 10 turns, maybe Scott got 1 turn. You know what I mean? But you could just tell he had so much joy being out on the lake and seeing that we had joy, if that makes sense. And Scott is the most patient person I've ever met in my life. And he can teach you to do any of the things. And even if you fall and, the boat has to come back around, you fall, the boat has to come, hundreds of times. He's so patient, and just never gets frustrated with you when you're learning. And it was just, you could tell that he really cared about you and really cared that you were having an enjoyment of your vacation. And it was also, you could tell that this was special to him, and it was special to him to be sharing it with people that were special to him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
And Scott's also hilarious, so anytime we play games or anything, he really is, and again, this is not like one specific memory, like all of these are aggregates of hundreds of memories, but just always has funny things to say, always laughing, having a good time, just really puts you at ease. So that's what I would say.
I would say for me, one of my fondest some memories that I have from growing up, and I know I've kind of said that Father's Day is not like brings back some not as satisfying memories, but there were definitely some great times. I would say that my brother's father, he was definitely the disciplinarian of our family. We always we always knew that if we got in trouble, he was the one that we were going to have to answer to. And we were not going to like the answer that we got. But he definitely, he did it, all of his discipline, and it came from a place of love. I think that he definitely loved us, and he wanted us all to reach our fullest potential. He was a big provider for our family. He worked a lot of long hours, and every time around Christmas or anything, I know that he was a large part of the provider, and did a lot to make sure that while we didn't have everything, if there was something that we needed, or I know for me, I played a lot of sports, and he was the one that gave a lot of money to make sure that I was able to play those sports and be able to get to where I needed to get to. I remember when we were younger, this is after the time my brother's father and my mom had split up. But I would still go over to his house, and we would play with my brothers and sisters, and he got us all a trampoline. Uh,
I love trampolines.
and we would have so much fun outside jumping on the trampoline. And he bought us a goat cart, and every time like our goat cart like messed up or something, like he was really good with his hands and fixing cars. He worked a lot on cars, and he would make sure that like the goat cart was back up and working. And something did like mess up on it, or the chain snapped or something like that. He was very good at fixing stuff. And really, a large part of the people that I'm close to from my extended family, it really comes from his side of the family, the Waddells. And my grandmother who passed away, like my cousin Sandre, like my cousin Thule, they were all like a big part of growing up for me, and it was because of the relationship that I had with his family. And these are people that will always be with me. These are people that I spent a lot of my childhood with. We would always go over to Grandma Waddell's house, and we would have cookouts over there. She would always make her Kool-Aid. Every 4th of July, we would always, like, there was not a 4th of July where we wasn't going over to Grandma Waddell's house, and the whole family is going to come over, and we're going to cook out. There was going to be fireworks.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, and it was great family bonding time. And I would definitely say that that was a huge part of my childhood and growing up, and something that I am very thankful for when I look back on my childhood. And that was because my sibling's father, like, he provided that for us. And he was a great provider. And looking back on it, like, I do still harbor some resentment towards him, but I can look back and say, like, there's no doubt in my mind that he was doing everything that he possibly could. None of us have a playbook for life and how these things are.
And none of us are perfect either.
Yeah, and none of us are perfect. We don't all make the right decisions, but he was doing the best he could with the best that he was given.
So do you feel like you could forgive him one day?
Yes, I can forgive him. I think I've already forgiven him, but that doesn't, like,
right,
I don't necessarily want him in my life or anything like that. I have forgiven him. Like, I didn't harbor any ill will towards him.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that he has, like, a joyful and happy rest of his life. But he doesn't need me in it to have that.
And you don't necessarily need him in yours.
True. But he definitely did a lot of good things. And he was a big part of my development and helping me get on my path. But there were, like, I feel like a lot of people in my situation who I would consider myself from a single parent home. A lot of kids in my situation, they get a lot of, there's just a lot of negativity that comes around it with being in a single parent home. But I would say there were a lot of people in my community, not necessarily coaches, but like uncles, cousins, everybody that like helped me develop, and all kind of stood as like father figures that helped me get to where I am today. And to all those people, it's way too many to name, but from little league coaches to high school coaches, basketball, people that fathers that help, or father figures and coaches that helped me get from practice to my grandmother's house, or like that had me over at their family's house to like make sure that I got to basketball practice, or when I started playing AAU basketball, that helped me get there. You guys were all father figures to me, and you all helped shape me into the man that I am today, and helped show me how fatherhood is supposed to work. Um, and I think I can take something. I take a little bit away from all of you in the way that you can be a father, you can be a supporter, um, and you can love your kids. And I thank you all for that.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I feel like I've also had some wonderful coaches, wonderful teachers, just people in my life that were very good father figures, uncles, tons of them. Also just surrounded me with love. And I think there's no substitute for that. So thank you to everyone in my life, not necessarily related by blood, but even those that are, just for providing wonderful role models and showing me that they love me. Thank you. And happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day, everyone. To all the good dads out there, great job. This day is for you. And keep doing what you're doing and keep raising your kids. You guys are definitely an indispensable
yes.
person in their life.
Yes. Well, thank you guys for watching. That is what we are doing.
Deuces.